within that, again, are something that can pass as you clone this report and use it for different purposes. Will pass through all the later generations of the same report. While we're here, let's talk about, let's say you want to filter on a date range. Now, this happens to be from an overview of the database, so the only date range that's available to us is the date of when records were added to the database, but the same principle will happen, is available whether you're doing a history report or a forecast report or anything else that has a date. Remember that you can pull in a date field, and when the date field is in its raw state, meaning it's only showing individual dates, this is basically what it looks like, and you're likely to have things sort of clustered around one or another date, especially if you imported your data into Goldmine. This is what your create on field will look like initially. But for grouping purposes, and therefore filtering purposes, you want to have your date field grouped into some logical groups that make more sense for picking a date range. Fortunately for that, we've got the capability to group your dates using the grouping dialog. Now, the way to group dates, you can actually make a selection of them and do a group in the same way that we did with the rep groups. So that's one way. I'm going to ungroup that and get back, though, to a more logical way of dealing with groups, and that is either select one cell that contains one of the dates or select the field itself. Could be either one. Now when you hit the group button, Excel determines that you're dealing with a field that's got all dates in it, and therefore gives you this special date grouping dialog. So that you can put in a date range up here if you want to, a specified date range. By default, it's going to put in the earliest date that shows up and the latest date that shows up in your data. So by default, it will just group them that way. So I can actually just come in here and leave the top part the way it is and say, I just want to group all of my dates by years and months, and here's how it's going to look. Let me go back and just show you that dialog again. I selected multiple items within in this by window, so it's by month, by year also. Could have done quarters as well. So if I include the quarters, it would look like that. And then each field that's created here can be treated like any other field that's in here. So if you wanted, again, to just filter on the ones from the year 1999, again, this is old data, you could put the years field up in your filtering area and choose 1999. Now you see there are a total of 74 showing in the display area here. Long as I'm at it, I'm going to also talk about filtering in the way that oftentimes people by default do. It seems that the most intuitive way to deal with this is not to pull something up to the top and filter, although I think it's a good idea to remember to do that, because that does it does a couple things for you. One is that it gives you a very explicit view of what it is that you're working with in your report, where if it's down here, you're not always sure that all the years are 1999. But the other thing that it does for you is it allows you to display it up there, although you can accomplish kind of the same thing by going in here and unchecking everything and saying, okay, I'm just going to show 1999. That also works. The difference, to my mind, is if you're only going to use 1 year, it doesn't really help you to have that showing down here as opposed to having it up on top. If there's only 1 year involved, typically in a report you want that in the header as opposed to actually showing up on every row or in a whole display. Now, that said, it is useful. Let's say you wanted to show multiple years down here. This is a very convenient way to display that, because here you can just turn on multiple years that you're going to include, like so, and that gives you a good deal of control over which section of the data that you're going to be working with. That said, you can also do another level of grouping on the dates. And I'm going to run the date dialog one more time here. And I'm going to regroup these dates. Actually, first I'm going to ungroup them so that it's just visually a little easier to understand. So I ungrouped it, got them back to their original state. And now I'm going to hit the group button again. And this time I'm going to say, I want a date range, but I want an odd date range. I want it from, let's say, from July 20th. Oh, and I better pick something in the date range that works for me. 1996 to, February 15th of 2000. So there's kind of an odd date range that I wanted. It doesn't coincide with any calendar units that you might expect. So I'm just going to group these by years, but within that date range. So what that does is that gives me everything before the first date that I put in is in one bucket. Everything after the last date that I put in is in another bucket, and then all the ones that are in between are grouped by dates. So this would actually give me the ability to use the create on field, again, as a filter, but a special kind of filter. If I go in here now and say, turn off all the ones that are before and after those two dates, now I have isolated on the 227 records that fall in between them, but I've excluded the ones that are outside my date range. So again, all I've done is go to my list under here and excluded the ones that I didn't want. And now I can actually pull this up on top. I still just have 227 instead of the full list, and I can do the rest of whatever the other reporting I want to do, show me by industry, by whatever else. Now, what is lacking here is any sort of a visual indication of what's being excluded or what's being included.